It was a quiet evening in a small town where the streets were lined with modest houses, each with its own story to tell. The town had never been known for its grandeur, but there was something special about it, a sense of community that made people feel welcome, even if they didn't have much. Among those who called this town home was a young girl, someone who had always felt like she didn't quite fit in. She was a dreamer, always with her head in the clouds, and her greatest passion was music. But what made her unique was that music wasn't just a hobby for her. It was an escape, a way to express what she could never say in words. The girl came from a simple family. Her parents worked hard every day, doing their best to make ends meet. Her father worked at the local mechanic shop while her mother helped out at a small cafe. Despite their best efforts, they didn't have much to show for it. But one thing they always made sure of was that their daughter had the chance to follow her dreams. They couldn't afford fancy piano lessons or a grand piano, but they did everything they could to support her love for music. They had an old second-hand piano that had been passed down through generations, and that was where the girl spent countless hours, her fingers dancing over the keys as she lost herself in the world of melodies and rhythms. She wasn't formally trained, but that never mattered to her. She learned on her own, by ear, picking up pieces she had heard from the radio or in movies, and she played them until she had them memorized. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine herself performing on grand stages, surrounded by an audience playing music that moved people. She wasn't just playing the piano, she was telling a story with every note. Each piece she played felt like an extension of herself, a way to express the emotions that words alone couldn't capture. But despite her talent, she had always felt like an outsider. People in her town knew she could play, but it wasn't the kind of thing that earned respect or admiration in a place like this. The town was full of hardworking people who valued practical skills, and while music was something that could entertain, it didn't hold the same weight as things like running a business or building something with your hands. The girl had always been told that she would need to focus on more practical things if she wanted to get anywhere in life, and her dreams of becoming a musician seemed distant, almost out of reach. It was during the annual town gala that things began to change. The gala was a big event, not just for the people of the town, but for the surrounding areas as well. It was a night when the wealthy and influential people from neighboring cities came to mingle, show off their wealth, and enjoy the entertainment. There was always a contest, usually a cooking competition or a dance-off, but this year the organizers had decided to do something different. They had announced that they were holding a piano competition, and the winner would receive a cash prize and an opportunity to perform at a prestigious venue in the city. It was an unexpected opportunity, one that the girl hadn't anticipated. But when she heard about it, something sparked within her. She had never imagined that she would have the chance to perform in front of such an influential crowd. The idea both excited and terrified her. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but something deep down told her she had to try. She spent the next few days practicing harder than ever before, working on the pieces she had always loved to play. She knew she wasn't the most experienced, but she had something that the others didn't: passion. Music was a part of her, and she was determined to show everyone that it was more than just notes on a page. It was her voice, her heart and her soul. The night of the gala arrived, and the girl found herself standing outside the grand venue, her heart pounding in her chest. The building was magnificent, its tall windows glowing with golden light. She could hear the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting from within, and as she walked closer, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. She had never been in a place like this before, a place where the rich and powerful gathered. Her simple dress felt out of place amidst the expensive gowns and suits that filled the lobby. Inside, the atmosphere was one of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering light over the guests as they sipped champagne and engaged in lively conversation. There were tables filled with food, and the walls were lined with beautiful paintings and sculptures. Everything seemed so far removed from the life she had known. The girl felt like a small fish in a vast ocean, unsure of where she fit in or if she even belonged here at all. But she pushed aside her doubts and made her way to the piano, where the competition was being held. It was an elegant grand piano, polished to perfection, its black surface gleaming under the lights. She wasn't the first to arrive, and as she watched the other competitors prepare, she couldn't help but feel intimidated. They all seemed so confident, their attire so refined, their posture so poised. She felt small in comparison, as if she didn't belong in this world of wealth and perfection. She looked down at her own dress, simple, inexpensive, and wondered if she was even worthy of sharing the same stage as these people. When her name was called, she felt her stomach flip. It was her turn. She walked slowly to the piano, her hands shaking with nerves. The audience, a mixture of wealthy patrons and local residents, turned their attention to her. The whispers started almost immediately. Some of the guests looked at her with mild curiosity, while others barely seemed to notice. There was a businessman sitting near the front who had been speaking loudly to his companions, and when he saw the girl approach the piano, he scoffed. "Is she really going to play?" he muttered, his voice carrying across the room. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." The girl's heart sank. She had heard people talk about her like this before, but hearing it out loud, especially in front of so many people, was different. The businessman's words cut through her, making her feel even smaller than she already did, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. The moment had arrived and she had to focus. She sat at the piano, trying to steady her shaking hands. The room was silent as she placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had practiced this piece over and over, and now it was time to play. The first notes were shaky, but she quickly regained her confidence. She let the music flow from her fingers, trying to block out the noise and the judgment she felt. As she played, she could hear the whispers from the audience again, but she refused to let them stop her. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let anyone's criticism stop her now. But the more she played, the more she could feel the judgment in the air. Some of the guests were nodding politely, but others were openly dismissing her. She could see the businessman rolling his eyes, and his whispered comments were loud enough for her to hear. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to his companion. "She's completely out of her depth." The girl's hands trembled, and for a moment she almost stopped. But then she thought of her parents, how they had supported her even when no one else did. She thought of all the hours she had spent practicing, alone in her room, pouring her heart into the piano. She couldn't give up now. She had worked too hard, and the music meant too much to her. She pressed on, determined to finish the piece. As she played, she began to focus less on the audience and more on the music itself. The notes became clearer, the rhythm steadier, and the melody more powerful. For a brief moment, the noise of the room faded away, and all she could hear was the sound of her own music. She wasn't playing for anyone else anymore. She was playing for herself, for the joy that music brought her. And when she finished, there was silence. The room was still, as if the music had taken everyone by surprise. The girl held her breath, unsure of what to expect. She had given everything she had, but what would they think? Would they laugh? Would they mock her? But instead of laughter or ridicule, the room remained quiet. The businessman, who had been so quick to judge her, was staring at her in disbelief. The silence stretched on, and the girl's heart raced in anticipation. What was going to happen next? The silence that followed her performance felt like an eternity. The young girl sat motionless at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. She could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her chest, the sound growing louder with every passing second. The room was still, almost too still. She tried to gauge the audience's reaction, but their expressions were unreadable, as if they were all in a daze. She had expected some sort of response, even if it was just polite applause, but now she wondered if perhaps she had done something wrong. Had she made a mistake? Had they not liked her performance? Her fingers were stiff, and she pulled them away from the keys. She took a quick glance around the room, unsure of what to do next. The guests, many of whom had been whispering just moments before, now seemed frozen, as if they were waiting for something to happen. The businessman who had mocked her earlier was staring at her, his mouth slightly agape, his gaze fixed on her with a strange intensity. She felt the weight of his scrutiny, his judgment. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time, as if the girl who had been the subject of his ridicule only moments ago was no longer the same person in his eyes. The girl looked at the floor, her face flushed with embarrassment. She could feel her palms sweating, the nerves returning in full force. It had been so much easier to play when she had been focused on the music, when she had been lost in the rhythm of the notes. But now, with all those eyes on her, she felt exposed, vulnerable, like she was under a magnifying glass. Every flaw magnified for the world to see. Then, almost as if they had been waiting for some sort of signal, the first clap rang out. It was hesitant at first, unsure. But then another clap followed, and another. Slowly, the clapping began to grow in strength until it filled the room. The girl's heart leapt in her chest and she looked up, surprised. She hadn't expected this kind of response. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she had ever imagined. The people who had once mocked her, who had made her feel so small, were now applauding her performance. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The businessman who had been so quick to judge her was now clapping the hardest, a wide smile spreading across his face. The others too were clapping, their faces filled with admiration. Some even stood to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. The girl blinked, unsure of what was happening. She had never experienced anything like this before. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and yet here she was, receiving praise from people she had never even imagined would take notice of her. For a moment, she sat there, frozen. The applause was overwhelming, and she didn't know how to react. It felt surreal. She had always dreamed of being recognized for her music, but never in a setting like this, never in front of so many influential people. Her mind raced, trying to process the situation. Was this really happening? Were they really applauding her? Finally, she stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of gratitude, but she didn't know how to express the emotions flooding her. She had worked so hard for this moment, and now it felt like a dream. She had come from nothing, from a life where her talent had often been overlooked, and now she was receiving recognition that she had never thought possible. The applause continued, and the girl made her way off the stage, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had expected to feel relief, to feel like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, but instead she felt a strange mix of pride and confusion. What had just happened? How had she gone from being the object of ridicule to the center of admiration? As she stepped down from the stage, she was greeted by several people, all eager to congratulate her. One woman, who appeared to be one of the event organizers, took her hand and smiled warmly. "That was beautiful," she said. "You've got an incredible gift. I can't wait to see where your music takes you." The girl managed a smile, though she was still in shock. She had never imagined that something like this would happen. She had always dreamed of playing in front of a crowd, but she never thought it would be at an event like this, surrounded by so many people who seemed to live in an entirely different world from hers, and yet here she was receiving praise from them, the very same people who had once seemed so out of reach. "Thank you," she said softly, still processing everything. I wasn't sure how it would go." "You were amazing," the woman said, her smile growing wider. "You've got something special. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl nodded, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her. She hadn't expected anyone to be so kind, so genuine. She had always believed that people like her, the ones from small towns, the ones without fancy training or connections, were never going to get the recognition they deserved. But here, in this room full of important people, she had just proven herself. And it wasn't just about the applause, it was about the way they saw her, the way they recognized her talent. As the evening went on, the girl found herself slowly being pulled into conversations with other guests. Some of them were musicians, others were wealthy patrons, all offering words of encouragement and admiration. The businessman who had been so critical earlier approached her again, his demeanor now completely different. He looked at her with something resembling respect in his eyes, a far cry from the dismissive attitude he had shown earlier. "I have to admit," he said, his voice a bit quieter now, "I didn't expect that. You've got talent, real talent." "I was wrong about you." The girl looked at him, unsure of what to say. She had never expected this kind of change in attitude, especially not from someone like him. But instead of being defensive or angry, she felt a strange sense of gratitude. He had been harsh with her earlier, but now he was acknowledging her abilities, and that meant something. It meant that she had earned his respect. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I've worked really hard." "I can see that," he said with a nod. "And I think you deserve more than just applause. You've got potential, and I'd like to help you." The girl's eyes widened. "Help me?" The businessman smiled. "I've got connections in the music industry. I can introduce you to the right people. With your talent, you could go far." The girl felt a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was someone offering to help her? Someone with the power to actually make a difference in her life? She had always dreamed of performing in front of bigger audiences, of sharing her music with the world, but she had never imagined it could actually happen. And yet here it was, an opportunity she had never expected. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," the businessman replied. "Just keep playing, keep improving. The rest will follow." And just like that, everything had changed. The girl who had once felt so small and insignificant now found herself standing on the precipice of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. She had proven herself, not just to the audience, but to herself as well. And the best part? She had done it all on her own. As the evening came to a close and the guests began to filter out, the girl felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like it was within her reach. The applause had faded. The lights had dimmed, but the girl knew that this was only the beginning. She had stepped onto that stage with nothing but a piano and a dream. And now she was leaving with something far more valuable, a sense of possibility, and the knowledge that she was capable of far more than she had ever believed. The days that followed the gala felt like a whirlwind. Everything had changed so quickly for the girl. One moment she was just another person in a small town, playing piano in the privacy of her room, and the next, she was being noticed by some of the most influential people she had ever imagined. The applause still echoed in her mind, as did the businessman's words offering to help her. She had gone from being overlooked to being offered opportunities she had only dreamed about. But despite the excitement, there was still a sense of disbelief. She couldn't help but wonder if it was all real. She had played her heart out that night, and while the applause had been overwhelming, she didn't know if it meant she had truly made it, or if it was just a one-time thing. Would people still remember her, or would she fade back into obscurity once the excitement of the gala died down? She tried not to dwell on the doubts, though it wasn't easy. There were moments when she'd catch herself staring out of the window, lost in thought, wondering where this new path would lead her. The girl spent the following days practicing, as she always had, but now there was an added sense of urgency. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for something bigger, for an opportunity that could change everything. The idea that someone, especially someone so important, had noticed her talent made her realize just how much she had to offer. She had always played the piano for herself, but now she was beginning to play it for the world. She didn't expect things to happen overnight. She knew that real success took time, and she was prepared to put in the work. But every time she sat at the piano, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She remembered the businessman's offer and wondered how she could possibly turn it into something more than just a fleeting moment of recognition. Was this the break she had been waiting for? Could she actually make something of herself in the music world? A few days after the gala, the girl received an email. She opened it nervously, unsure of what to expect. It was from the businessman. He had reached out to her to set up a meeting. He had already begun to make good on his promise. The email detailed a time and place for them to meet. Her heart raced as she read it, and for a moment she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She quickly confirmed the meeting, but there was still a part of her that felt like this might be a dream. She had to see it for herself. The day of the meeting arrived, and she found herself standing outside a sleek, modern building in the city. It was a far cry from the small, familiar streets of her town. The building towered above her, a symbol of the world she was about to step into. Her stomach churned with nerves as she walked through the glass doors. She had always felt like an outsider in places like this, and now she was about to meet someone who could potentially change the course of her life forever. She was escorted into a conference room where the businessman was already waiting. He greeted her warmly, his demeanor completely different from the man she had met at the gala. He didn't seem like the same person who had been so dismissive of her that night. There was a genuine respect in his eyes now. He motioned for her to sit down across from him. "I'm glad you could make it," he said with a smile. "I've been speaking with a few contacts in the music industry, and I think there's potential for you to do something great. We can't waste time. If you're serious about this, we'll need to work hard." The girl sat there, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Just a few days ago, she had been a nobody, playing for no one but herself. Now she was sitting in a room with a businessman who was talking about introducing her to the world of music. It was all so surreal. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, though her heart was racing. He nodded. "Good. We'll start with some introductions. I have connections at a few agencies, and I think I can get you a spot with a talent scout." From there, we'll work on getting you into some gigs, maybe even a few auditions. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but I'm confident that with your talent, we can make something happen." The girl felt a surge of excitement and anxiety. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time she felt like she was on the right path. She had always dreamed of this moment, of being seen, of being heard, and now it was happening. She tried to keep her nerves in check, but the idea of performing for a larger audience, of facing the challenges that came with being in the music business, was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, the girl found herself navigating a world she had never imagined. She met with talent scouts, attended rehearsals with other musicians, and learned about the inner workings of the industry. It was overwhelming at times. The pace was fast and the pressure to perform well was constant. But through it all, she never lost sight of the music. Whenever she sat at the piano, everything else faded away. The doubts, the fear, the uncertainty, none of it mattered when her fingers touched the keys. As she grew more comfortable in this new world, she began to gain confidence. The people she met were supportive, and many of them seemed genuinely impressed by her talent. There were moments of doubt, of course, times when she felt like she didn't belong or when the weight of expectations became too much to bear. But she pushed through those moments, reminding herself of the reason she was there, for the love of music. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, the girl found herself walking through the city streets, her mind buzzing with thoughts. She had been so caught up in the whirlwind of meetings, auditions, and rehearsals that she hadn't had much time to reflect. But as she walked, she found herself thinking back to that night at the gala, to the moment when she had sat at the piano and played for the first time in front of such a large audience. It had felt like the moment everything changed, and now here she was, living a life she had never thought possible. The businessman had kept his word. He had introduced her to the right people, and now she was getting more opportunities than she could have ever imagined. She had already been offered a spot in a small but prestigious performance, and talks were underway for her to perform at other high-profile venues. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. The pressure was immense, and there were times when she felt the weight of it all. She had to keep up with a demanding schedule, often practicing late into the night and attending endless meetings. But through it all, she remained focused on the music. She knew that it was her passion, her gift, that would get her through the tough times, and through the countless auditions, rehearsals, and performances. The girl learned something valuable, that success wasn't just about being talented, it was about resilience. It was about pushing through the difficult moments and staying true to yourself, no matter how many obstacles stood in your way. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she was ready for whatever came next. One evening, after a long day of practice, the girl sat at her piano, reflecting on how far she had come. The music that had once been her escape, her solace, was now her ticket to a future she had only dreamed of. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had taken, for the people who had believed in her, and for the music that had always been there, guiding her through every step. It wasn't just about the applause or the recognition. It was about the joy she felt when she played, the way the music made her feel alive. And as she played that night, she realized that no matter what happened next, she would never lose that feeling. She would continue to play, to share her music with the world, and to stay true to the passion that had brought her this far. Weeks passed, and the girl found herself caught in a whirlwind of rehearsals, auditions, and performances. Every day felt like a new chapter in a book she had only just begun reading, and it was all moving so quickly. She was no longer the shy, small-town girl playing the piano in the corner of her room. She was becoming someone entirely new, someone who was beginning to be recognized for her talent, her passion, and her hard work. At first, she had felt out of place in the world she had entered. The music industry was fast-paced, full of people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing, while she still felt like she was learning how to navigate it all. The pressure was constant. Every performance, every meeting, every rehearsal felt like it was a test. And yet, despite the overwhelming nature of it all, there was something about the music that kept her grounded. The girl had grown used to performing in front of large crowds. What had once seemed terrifying was now a part of her routine. But with each new performance, she also felt the weight of the expectations that came with it. There were times when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she was truly ready for all of this. The competition in the industry was fierce, and she was constantly aware that there were countless other musicians out there who were just as talented, if not more so. One evening, after a particularly exhausting rehearsal, the girl sat in her small dressing room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was smudged and her hair was a mess from hours of practice. She looked tired, worn down, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she could keep going. The pressure to perform perfectly every time was starting to feel like too much. She had come so far, and yet the fear of failure still loomed over her. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from the businessman, the one who had first believed in her talent and introduced her to the world she now found herself in. She quickly opened the message. "I've been hearing great things about you," it said. "Your next performance is going to be a big one. I'm confident you'll blow them away. Just remember, you've earned your place here." The words gave her a small sense of comfort, but it wasn't enough to completely calm the storm of doubts swirling in her mind. She had been working so hard, pushing herself to be the best, but was it enough? Was she really ready to face an even bigger stage? One that might push her even further into the spotlight? She took a deep breath and put her phone down. Her reflection stared back at her, and for a moment she saw not the exhausted girl who was questioning her worth, but the girl who had dreamed of this moment for so long. The girl who had played her heart out on that piano in the town's small hall. The girl who had refused to let anyone's words hold her back. The girl who had taken a chance, stepped out of her comfort zone, and played for something bigger than herself. The next day, as she prepared for the performance, she reminded herself of why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just for the applause or the recognition. It wasn't even for the fame. It was for the music. It was for the joy she felt when her fingers danced over the keys, when the notes flowed from her heart and into the world. It was that feeling that had carried her this far, and it would be that same feeling that would carry her forward. As she walked onto the stage, the nerves returned, but they were no longer paralyzing. She had learned to embrace the nerves, to let them fuel her rather than hold her back. The stage was bigger than any she had played on before, the audience larger, the expectations higher. But she had earned this moment. She had earned her place here. The spotlight hit her, and for a moment everything else faded away. She sat at the piano, her fingers resting on the keys. She closed her eyes, letting the music fill her thoughts. She had chosen a piece that was both challenging and meaningful to her. It was a piece that had always made her feel alive, a piece that expressed everything she had felt throughout her journey. It was the perfect way to tell her story. The music began, and she let herself be carried away by the notes. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt a sense of freedom, a sense of release. It didn't matter how many people were watching. It didn't matter if she made a mistake. What mattered was the music. What mattered was the way it made her feel, the way it made her connect with the audience in a way that words never could. The performance was flawless. Every note rang out with clarity and emotion, each movement of her hands perfectly timed. She was no longer thinking about the audience, the pressure, or the doubts. She was just playing, lost in the music, lost in the moment. And when the final note echoed through the hall, the audience was silent for a split second before they erupted into applause. This time the applause was different. It wasn't just polite clapping or brief recognition. It was a true standing ovation. The audience was on their feet cheering for her, and the girl felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had done it. She had proven not only to them but to herself that she was ready for this. She was ready to be a part of this world, to share her music with the world. Backstage, the girl could barely contain her excitement. Her heart was still racing, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline. She had never felt so alive. She had stepped onto that stage unsure of what would happen, and now she was overwhelmed by the love and admiration she had received. She had always dreamed of this moment, but now that it had come, she realized it was so much more than she had imagined. It wasn't just about the applause, it was about the connection, the way her music had reached out and touched the hearts of the people in the room. The businessman came to congratulate her, his face beaming with pride. "I knew you could do it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've come a long way. This is just the beginning." The girl smiled, grateful for his support. But it wasn't just his words that mattered to her. It was the realization that she had made it on her own. She had worked hard, fought through the doubts and the fears, and had earned this moment. The businessman had believed in her, but it was her own determination that had gotten her here. The next few days were a blur. There were interviews, press conferences, and meetings with other industry professionals. The girl was suddenly in the spotlight, the subject of articles and stories about her rise from a small-town pianist to a rising star in the music world. It was all so surreal. She had never imagined that one night at a small-town gala would lead to this. But even with all the attention, the girl knew one thing. She wasn't going to lose sight of what had brought her here. She wasn't going to let the fame, the recognition, or the pressure change her. The music had always been the most important thing. It had always been her way of expressing herself, her way of telling the world who she was. And that, she promised herself, would never change. As the days went on, the girl continued to perform, continuing to gain recognition and new opportunities. She was offered more performances at prestigious venues, and her music began to reach more people. She was no longer just a girl from a small town. She was an artist, a musician, someone who had found her place in the world. But despite her success, she remained grounded. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, that the road to success wasn't always easy. But she also knew that with her passion, her determination, and her love for the music, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. And so as the girl continued on her journey, she played not for the applause or the recognition, but for the music itself, for the joy, the freedom, and the expression that only music could bring. As the months passed, the girl's life began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. She had become a regular on stages far bigger than anything she had ever dreamed of. Her performances were getting more and more attention, and soon she wasn't just a local talent anymore. She was being recognized on a national level. But despite all the accolades and the newfound fame, there was one thing that kept her grounded: her love for the piano. The music had always been her true focus, and it was that passion that carried her through even the toughest days. Every day felt like a new challenge. The demands of the music world were relentless, and the pressure to constantly perform at a high level weighed on her shoulders. She had once dreamed of performing in front of large audiences, but now that it was her reality, she found herself grappling with the realities of living up to those expectations. The rehearsals were long and tiring, and there were days when she felt completely exhausted, both physically and mentally. The life she had once dreamed of was here, but it wasn't always as glamorous as it had seemed. The girl had come so far, but there were still moments when she doubted herself. Was she really good enough for this? The music industry was full of talented people, and she had to remind herself daily that she had earned her place in it. But sometimes the comparisons to other musicians, the pressure to outdo herself every time she took the stage, felt overwhelming. She had worked so hard to get here, but there were still moments when she wasn't sure if she could keep up with the pace. But there was something inside her, something deep within her heart, that kept her going. It was the music. It was the way she felt when she sat at the piano, her fingers moving across the keys, and she lost herself in the notes. The stage had become a place of expression for her, a place where she could tell her story without words. And even on the toughest days when the pressure seemed too much to bear, she reminded herself of why she started this journey in the first place. One evening, after a particularly difficult rehearsal, the girl sat alone in her dressing room, staring at the piano in front of her. She had just performed a piece that she had been struggling with for weeks. The performance had gone well, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been her best. The doubts crept in, and she found herself questioning whether she was truly capable of meeting the expectations set before her. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from the businessman, the one who had believed in her from the very beginning. "Great job tonight," the message read. "I know it's been tough lately, but you're getting better every time. You're on the right path. Keep pushing forward." She smiled softly at the message, grateful for his encouragement. His words were a reminder that even when she felt like she wasn't enough, there were people who believed in her. But even more than that, she realized that she had to start believing in herself. The road to success wasn't always going to be smooth, and there would be times when she stumbled or felt like giving up. But that didn't mean she wasn't worthy of the stage or the opportunities that had come her way. The next day, she found herself standing in front of a grand stage once again. This time, it was for a performance that she had been working toward for months. It was a major event, one that would be attended by some of the most influential people in the music industry. The nerves were back, but she had learned to channel them into something productive. She had been nervous before every performance, but she had also learned to embrace the fear and use it as fuel for her music. As she walked out onto the stage, the crowd's applause was overwhelming, and for a moment she felt herself freeze. The pressure was on, and it was easy to feel small in front of so many people. But she reminded herself of everything she had gone through to get here. She had earned this. She had worked hard for this moment. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music flowed from her hands, and with each note the nerves melted away. She felt the rhythm of the piece coursing through her, the way it connected to her own emotions. It was more than just a performance, it was a part of her, a way for her to express herself in a way words could never do. As the final note echoed through the hall, she was met with silence. For a split second, she held her breath, unsure of what to expect. Then the applause began. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was loud, enthusiastic, filled with admiration. The audience was standing, applauding her for what she had just shared with them. The girl's heart soared as she stood and took a bow, the feeling of validation and pride washing over her. Backstage, she couldn't help but smile. She had done it. She had faced the fear, the doubts, and the pressure, and she had come out on top. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that she belonged in this world. The path hadn't been easy, but every step had been worth it. In the days that followed, things only continued to improve. The recognition she had received from that performance led to even more opportunities. She was invited to perform at prestigious venues, and her name began to spread within the music community. She was finally starting to feel like she had found her place in the world, but even as her career blossomed, she never forgot the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the small, quiet town she had come from, the old piano that had been her refuge, and the way she had played for the sheer joy of it before the fame and expectations had ever entered the picture. Those memories kept her humble, kept her focused on what truly mattered. One day, after a performance in a large city, the girl took a walk by herself. She found a quiet park, sat down on a bench, and closed her eyes. The music was still in her mind, but it wasn't the noise of the industry or the pressure of her next big performance. It was the sound of her music, the way it had always been, pure, simple, and true. She thought about everything she had learned over the past few years. She had faced countless obstacles, but she had also gained so much: confidence, experience, and a deeper understanding of who she was and what she wanted. The girl realized that success wasn't just about performing on grand stages or receiving applause. It was about staying true to herself no matter what. It was about the joy of playing, the connection with the audience, and the music itself. It had always been about the music. As she walked back to her hotel, her heart was full, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She had achieved things she had once thought were impossible, but she knew this was only the beginning. There were still many more stages to stand on, many more songs to play, and many more people to connect with through her music. But no matter where this journey took her, she promised herself that she would never forget why she started. The music had always been her anchor, her source of strength. It had carried her through the doubts, the fears, and the struggles. And as long as she had the piano, as long as she had the music, she knew she would always have a way to express herself, to find peace, and to keep moving forward. The future was uncertain, as it always is. There would be new challenges, new expectations, and perhaps even new obstacles along the way. But with the music in her heart, the girl knew that no matter what happened, she was ready. She had found her place, and she had found herself along the way, and with that realization, she stepped confidently into the future, her music leading the way.